Welcome to Treon's Realm. With excitement around Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and Legend of Zelda happen to be my favorite series of all time, I want to take a look through the entire series and kind of share my own excitement for it and the types of things that I liked about it. Now, I want to start off specifically with the starting point of the entire series, and that would be the original Legend of Zelda. I experienced this one firsthand back in, this had to be the late 80s. Now, I didn't have a system myself, but I used to play this all the time at any friend's house that I could go to. This was the first game I would always put in, and I absolutely fell in love with it. So right from the get-go, I've been a lifelong Zelda fan. Now, I know a lot of people complain about how difficult this one is. And yes, if you're going into it blind nowadays and you're trying to go in with no information, yes, it is pretty difficult. But you also have to take into account that's not how games were played back then. For one, they were designed completely differently. Now, one of the big things is because of the limitations of the technology, the developer, the designer, never expected you to just go in blind with the game itself and not have additional material to understand how to play it. In the case of the original NES Zelda, Nintendo knew that most people would not know how to play it. So as a result, they included materials to get you started with it. Now, I know this is lost on the current generation of games because this type of stuff is not included because it's largely built into the game by default. But back then, that was not the case. So you obviously have your cartridge. Now, in the case of mine, I have what is called a 5-screw. That meant that there were 5 screws that held the case together. This was the case with most early games. I believe it was through 86 or 87 that they did this. From the launch of the system in late 85 all the way up to, I believe it was 1987. All NES cartridges pretty much had 5-screw. Now, if I'm correct, if I remember this correctly, to save on cost, they actually changed it up to a 3-screw design, and then instead of the additional 2 screws, they put these clips in so that the cartridge or the back of the cartridge just slide in, lock down, you lock it down these 3 ways. Whereas this one, you have to lock down all of them. Now, to keep in mind, there were 3 different variations on the NES of the original Legend of Zelda. There was the Gold Cart 5-screw, there was the Gold Cart 3-screw, so very much like the Zelda 2 here. There's a version of this that has this design. And then there was a re-release, I believe it was in the early to mid-90s, essentially their version of the greatest hits back then, and that was a gray cartridge Zelda. So it was the classic Nintendo gray cartridge with this label. It looks really weird when you see it, because if you've ever seen one out in the wild, it almost looks like it's fake or someone made like a reproduction of it. But I can assure you this was the final official release of it here in the States. Move over here. When you got Zelda, you actually got some good helper information. So the actual instructions, it took you through. It gave you the backstory, a lot of backstory actually, laid everything out for you, walks you through the entire beginning, controls, it gives you full-on details of what the different screens do, how the game operates, even told you like the enhancements to the sword because you would find additional swords as you leveled up or collected more hearts. It broke down all of the items. It would lay down or lay out all the enemies as well. And interestingly, if you watch the Zelda cartoon from, I believe it was 1989 that used to run on Fridays with the Super Mario Super Show, a lot of these designs here were directly translated into the show. So a lot of people like to say, oh, it's not accurate, but with the information they had of the first 2 games, and specifically the first one, like Tektites in the show look very much like they do in the game, or the game's artwork here. Same with the Octorok, same with the Armos. Hell, I think even, well, Zora, but they call it Zola here. Even those were pretty accurate in the show. They'd walk you through, explain the map, the different doors, enemies specific to the dungeons as well, and they even gave you a complete walkthrough of how to get to the first dungeon from your starting spot. So it gives you quite a bit to get you started. It even gives you the map all the way to the second dungeon. So they were pretty good at explaining the base stuff of what you needed. But let's say you were having more trouble with it, they also included a maps and strategies. And to make sure you weren't tempted, they actually had a seal right here, a little sticker that kept it shut. So you'd have to actually cut that open to make sure that you actually wanted to see these. And they gave you quite a bit of the map there. Now, this is one that I collected later, but my original version and my friend's versions, we actually would take a pencil and draw in the additional squares of the map like they intended you to. So you had a rough idea of what was on each one of these. They'd even give you question marks to give you an idea of, where there might be secrets. So you'd have a full screen. If you had the question mark there, it gave you a pretty good idea of, what could be there, and the instructions actually gave you enough hints that you'd be able to figure that out. And to take it a step further, they even give you full-on maps of the first 2 stages. And they gave you some hints of the later stages as well, including what were the secrets to find there. So if the game was designed today, I'm sure that Nintendo would include this type of stuff into the game itself. But if you bought this game way back when it first came out and you kept everything, which I know that seems odd, but people did keep a lot more of this stuff unless they were renting. You gotta keep in mind, renting wasn't something that came around until, if I remember correctly, it was later 80s, early 90s in particular, especially in my area. Back then, you'd have either this, a Nintendo Power. Nintendo also released their own atlas here. They give you gobs of information here to walk you through the entire process as well. Nice thing about this was that it also gave you the entire second quest as well. So you would have the original game with its information, a Nintendo Power, one of the guides, or, because the internet wasn't really a thing back then, friends. I remember traveling to school, getting on the school bus. My friends and I, we had stuff like this, or we had our own hand-drawn maps, and we'd sit next to each other on the bus and share secrets that we had found. We got kind of a rebirth of this with Breath of the Wild. It's one of the things I absolutely love about the game. Specifically with Breath of the Wild, I noticed in 2017, 2018 and on, before, not as many people used the guides. They were sharing stuff online through videos, through Twitter, stuff like that. And it kind of brought about that old school feeling of how you used to go through a game like this, where you would share information with one another. Now, if you want to experience Legend of Zelda, there are numerous ways to do it. And it comes to the case of digital, it's actually become both easy and difficult. Nintendo has removed a lot of the ways that you used to be able to get it. Because before you could use the Wii, the Wii U, the 3DS. But outside of that, that's all been shut down now. It's kind of the pitfall of an all-digital future, is that it's a glorified rental. You don't actually own the games. Now, if you were lucky enough to have downloaded them, then they're there for good, unless something happens to your system. But beyond that, the only modern way to do it would be specifically through the Switch. Oddly enough, I found a lot of people don't seem to know this, but if you have the Switch Online, the NSO, Nintendo Switch Online program, that includes a Game Boy app, an NES app, and a Super Nintendo app, which allows you to play a ton of games pretty much for free as long as you continue to keep your subscription going. If you let your subscription lapse, you lose access to the games. So think of it kind of like Netflix. You have a ton of NES games, but in particular, you have 2 different variations of Zelda. There's the original vanilla version, and then Nintendo does this odd thing where they do a special version. Now, in the case of the special version, what it is it starts you off, and you have essentially pretty much everything that you could potentially collect before going into a dungeon. So if you stayed on the surface and didn't go into any of the dungeons, you can get like the bait, you can get the red potion, the candle, bombs, the blue ring, which has your damage, and the power bracelet for moving the rocks. On top of that, they give you 255 rupees, which is the absolute max. And they've also hooked you up with all of the hearts that you can collect on the overworld before going in. And with 6 hearts, you are able to get the white sword as well. So if you're having trouble and you want a little bit of a boost in terms of the beginning of the game, this is the way to go. Because then you can just start going after the dungeons, and this will make things much easier early on in the game. Now, as it stands right now, this is your only official digital option. I'm sure you can work out there's plenty of unofficial ways. I have no problem with anyone who decides to go that route. If you have a Switch, $20 a year, you get access to this and a whole whole lot more. So it's your call on that one. As I said, a lot of people have the online membership, but they don't know that they have access to this. So that takes care of a digital way to access it. But let's say you want to go the old school legit way, you're a collector, you want to add this to your collection, or you want to play it physically from your collection. There are a couple different options for that. As I said, you had the 3 different variations of the original NES one. The 5-screw will probably be the hardest and most expensive to get a hold of. Behind that would probably be the gray version, and then the most common will be the 3-screw. Only thing you got to worry about in the case of these is that you may need to update the battery on it. It's not too terribly difficult, but it's an additional problem, if you're not as technically minded and you don't know what you're doing with it. Let's say you don't want to go for this particular original hardware, but let's say you have something else. Let's say you have the GameCube. There's a couple different variations on the GameCube. Nintendo did release a promotional disc that had 4 Zelda games on it. It has the original Zelda 2, Link's Awakening, it has Ocarina of Time, it also has Majora's Mask. We'll go into the Majora's Mask one a little bit later in the video where I cover that one, but there's a caveat to playing that version. But this is a perfectly playable, great version of it on the GameCube. These were given out, let's see, there were a couple different ways that they gave these out. One, they had some platinum GameCubes where for a period of time, if you bought that version of the system, they actually included this as a bonus disc with it. Another way that they did it was through Club Nintendo. If you registered, I think it was points or certain games. It's been over 20 years at this point. I don't remember the exact, but you register some stuff and then they would send this to you as a freebie. And I believe there was a third option where for a period of time, if you resubscribe to Nintendo Power, they would also send this to you as well. These can go a little bit high now, but it is a good way to go for it if you're looking to play multiple Zeldas back on the GameCube, especially since the GameCube is red hot right now. And there is one additional item on here. They have a playable demo of Wind Waker as well. But if you're going to play Wind Waker, you're either going to play the GameCube version or you're going to play the version on the Wii U. Now, there's actually a second way that you could play on the GameCube. Technically one beyond that, but it requires some additional hardware. But this one is a little lesser known. It's not exactly an official way to unlock it. But back in 2002, Nintendo released Animal Crossing. They did have a lot of old NES games that were emulated in here and ready to go. Some had to be unlocked through they had their e-reader cards. Other ones had codes that you could put in. The original official memory card that came with the game, I think when you start that island, if I remember correctly, I believe it had a game on there. Basically, you could unlock NES games. They would show up as little systems in your house. You could click on them, they'd let you actually play them, and they are full and perfectly emulated. Great way to experience those. Now, here's the thing. Nintendo never released a code or card for Legend of Zelda or I believe it was Super Mario Brothers. But both of those games are on the disc. So how do you unlock them? That's the big question. Well, there were 2 ways. One was you could use an action replay disc, and there was a way to unlock those so that you'd be able to play them, and once you unlocked them, you could save your file and then play it without the action replay. But you did need an action replay in order to be able to unlock it initially. And then Action Replay also released a specific Ultimate Codes disc specifically for this. And you would put this in before you pop that one in, and it would let you select what it is you wanted to unlock. And one of the big ones was that it would give you 100% catalog. So it would have everything unlocked and ready to go in the catalog right in the beginning of the game. And included with that was the original Zelda, original Super Mario, as well as all the additional games. If you have Animal Crossing and you have either an action replay or you have this disc, you will be able to unlock and play it in here, no problem, and it plays just fine. I have played it on here myself multiple times. It's a great way to experience it, but it's a little, as I said, a little in-depth to have to actually try and get it out of there. Nintendo did do a release of part of their classic NES series for the Game Boy Advance. They did Legend of Zelda. Great way to play it. It was nice to have it on the go. And these cartridges had a unique where they specifically looked like the gray color of an NES cartridge. And just like the other one, it had an instruction book for it as well. I keep mine sealed up because I like to keep them safe. But it's a good way to experience it, and this was the other odd way I was talking about playing on the GameCube. If you have a Game Boy player, you can pop this in and there you go. You've got Zelda on the GameCube as well. 2 more options to be able to play the original Legend of Zelda physically. If you were lucky enough to have gotten one of these back in, I believe it was 2016, the NES Classic actually has Zelda 1 and 2 on it. Great way to experience it. Aside from the short controller length, I'd get like a wireless adapter or an extension cable. But aside from that, this is a great way to experience the game. It looks good, it plays well, you have save states in there. So if you were lucky enough to get one of the official ones of these, that's a good way to play Zelda. You may not have even remembered that you've got it, but that's a way to do it. And the last one, still available as of the last time I checked, but I know that a lot of companies are clearancing these out. I would try to get one now if you have the option, and that would be the Game & Watch. This is a fun way to experience it. Unfortunately, there are some caveats. One is that it's all done through the speaker. There's no headphones. But the nice thing about this one versus all the others I've been talking about, this actually has the English and the Japanese version in there. Now, a lot of people don't know Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, Zelda 2 more so, but Zelda 1 and 2 do have some distinct differences in their Japanese version versus the version that got released over here in the States. One of the big things is, I know Nintendo re-released it on cartridges much later on in the Famicom's life cycle. Both Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, those were Famicom Disk System games to begin with. So in the case of the Famicom Disk System, it had an additional channel of audio, so the music will actually sound a little bit different. I know in the case of Zelda 2, like the water is animated, the enemies look a little bit different, sound effects are different, you can level up differently. It is a great way to get both versions without having to buy separate sets. Now, yes, the screen is a little small, but it's super crisp, looks great, plays great. It does remember where you left off, which is great if you're playing on the go. It's instantaneous, there's no loading, there's no booting. Like, you can literally power it off, set it down, go to sleep, come back, power it up, boom, and you are ready to go. While I had issues with Nintendo's first Game & Watch that they did for Mario, I do find this version to be a vastly superior option. This has more games, the games are much deeper, and you also have Link's Awakening in there, and Link's Awakening is one of the greatest Zelda games of all time. You're getting a ton of great content for a relatively inexpensive price. If you can get a hold of one of these, grab it up while you got the chance. It is an excellent system and a great way to have, some classic Zelda on the go, quick and easy. Now while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and let's just go ahead and throw Zelda 2 into this set as well. We'll take a look at that one. I know this is kind of the black sheep of the series. It's one of the games that I would argue is most desperately in need of a modern version or a remake or something along those lines. There have been numerous companies that have made kind of spiritual successors or their own take on the style, and I think they've done some good job. I know that there was an Adventure Time game on the DS and I believe 3DS from Way Forward that plays very much like Zelda 2. I think there's one on the Switch called Elliot Quest. That's another one that plays a lot like an 8-bit, old school Zelda 2. Great game, but yeah, its design is very dated today. Makes it one of the most difficult games in the entire series to return to. Now, I will freely admit, back in the day, I played through this one. I had a Game Genie on me, and I used, right here, I had my Atlas, and I was using this every chance I got. This game is so easy to get lost on. The maps are pretty damn huge. Actually battling through it was pretty tough. It's still one that I think is worth experiencing in some form. As I said, once again, digitally, it is fully playable on the NES app. You can do save states. So they have a standard version and they have a special one. So it maxes you out with 8 attack, 8 magic, 8 health. Doesn't have all the containers, but you are essentially fully leveled up and they give you all the spells. So again, this is an easy way to kind of get things off the ground and running. I would not fault anyone for jumping into the game with that. but a lot of people found this one kind of awkward in terms of it was a mix of like side-scrolling action with overhead exploration and an overworld. So the overworld was very much like a Final Fantasy game, and then the battles would go side-scrolling like, say, an old-school Metroid game. It definitely shows its age, but I would still say if you're a Zelda fan, you should give this one a try. And let's keep our fingers crossed that Nintendo is eventually going to do some type of remake or update. Now, this one, when it comes to physical, very much in the same boat as the original NES game. A little bit more limited. As I mentioned earlier, it is on the collector's edition for the GameCube. Now, it is not in Animal Crossing. Only Zelda 1 is here. So don't expect to get Zelda 2 in this one. This is going to be your only native way on a disc for the GameCube to be able to play this one. Also, like the Game Boy Advance Classic NES series, they did one for this as well. And same way, it has the gray cartridge. There's our instructions as well. Again, you can play this one on the Game Boy Player. You also have it on here, just like you did with the first one. Again, you've got save states. That'll probably be a huge help with this to be able to play with save states. I'm not going to fault anyone who goes that route. And absolutely get yourself the Nintendo Power, open up a game FAQ, have the Atlas, I don't care. Make sure you've got something to help you get through it. It is tough. It is probably one of the hardest games in the entire series. And like I just mentioned, it is also on here on the Game & Watch. Now, there is a cheat code in the case of both the NES and both the NES games on here. So when you go to start the game, you hold down the A button for, I believe it's like 5 or 6 seconds, and it will max out. You'll get all the magic containers, all life containers. You will be at level 8 on your attack, magic, and life, and you'll have all your spells. Great way to get started if you find the game really tough. And similarly over here, look at that, full health right out the gate. So you can take a lot more hits just getting started. Great way to kind of cheat the game and get yourself in there up and running if you're having some trouble with it. Ultimately, I think both games are great. I think both games deserve their place in history, but at the same time, I can completely understand if people are having trouble with them. They do come from a very archaic time in game design. We were just moving out of the Atari era, so games are much more simplistic back then. But Zelda is definitely one of the more in-depth titles from that era and has only grown to become an absolutely stellar series. I would recommend that you experience both of them in some way, and in the case of both, don't hesitate. Get guides, find people who've played it before to give you tips starting out. Try plugging through this one. I think you'll find some rewarding stuff with it, but there's a lot of frustration that comes with it and really makes you wish that they would do a full-on remake. And if I'm being honest, I would not be adverse to seeing what they would do with a full-on remake of this. On the flip side, if you know anything about Breath of the Wild's development, its original prototype was actually a modified version of this that had all of the things like being able to cut down the trees, light wood on fire, that type of stuff as a kind of way to interact with the world. I wish they would release something like that so we could actually experience it. But if they remade this one and they used something along those lines, it could be really interesting. I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to me. As I said, it is my favorite series. I mean, as you can see, and my wedding ring is actually a custom made one that my wife made for me that's specifically for Legend of Zelda. This series means a lot to me. Thank you again for watching. If you'd like to see more content like this, please subscribe and hit that like button. Thank you again. Talk to you later.